Today we're going to be talking about one of the great ones, a film considered to be among the greatest ever made. I'm speaking, of course, about The Bridge on the River Kwai, made in 1957, and the movie that Alec Guinness got his Academy Award for. Well, the one that he got for a specific movie, he also got a Lifetime Achievement one later on. So, background. Bridge on the River Kwai was released in 1957 and was director David Lean's first massive scale epic. He would later go on to make Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, starring many of the same actors. It was made during an era where Hollywood was experimenting with big budget international productions. I think Ben-Hur would be an example of this, as would the Ten Commandments. It was filmed largely in Sri Lanka. The shooting was very difficult, as one would expect. Rains, engineering failures, supply problems, and they actually built the bridge, which is very impressive because if they did it today, they would just do a CG bridge. And the cast was pushed very hard, especially Alec Guinness. Now, for those of you who have heard of Alec Guinness before, you're probably aware of him from his role as Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Now, he hated being associated with the character because he viewed films like this or Lawrence of Arabia as being the defining movies of his career, as opposed to this goofy sci-fi film. However, because he was a big name actor and his star power helped to sell the movie, they gave him an amazing deal to be part of A New Hope. He was given, I think, ultimately 2% or 2.25% of gross box office of Star Wars A New Hope, which was an extremely profitable movie. So he made something like $50 to $75 million. So he always got irritated when people were like, "Oh, you're Obi-Wan Kenobi, can I have your autograph?" But he acknowledged it funded his comfortable retirement. Another little side, Alec Guinness, I think when he was younger, wanted to become an Anglican minister, but he converted to Catholicism and he was married or got married, so he couldn't become a priest. But just another side note. Anyway, so the film was an enormous success. It won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Alec Guinness, and Best Score. Critics praised its blend of epic spectacle, character-driven drama, and philosophical ambiguity. Even at its time, some veterans critiqued its historical liberties, particularly its portrayal of British officers collaborating so willingly, but the objections were drowned out by the film's acclaim. It's not meant to be a 100% historically accurate movie. So it referenced all kinds of times later, influenced a lot of Vietnam era anti-war movies. I don't think Francis Ford Coppola listed this as a direct influence on Apocalypse Now, but a lot of it is very similar. And I would not be surprised if it wasn't an inspiration or the movies that this inspired Apocalypse Now or something to that effect. Both of them seem to have taken a lot of inspiration from Heart of Darkness. Today, the historical accuracy aspect is kind of not that important. It's a story about pride, professionalism, Shakespearean tragedy, and it remains a fixture in a lot of greatest film lists. So that being said, let's get into it. So where does this movie go on the media taste scale? We're just going to take a look at this before we get into the actual plot. So I would put this pretty clearly in the contemplative category. It's not the most extreme example of contemplative, like there is a little bit of action in this movie, but it's very much driven by psychological conflict, moral irony, and philosophical unraveling rather than action. While the film does contain moments of tension and spectacle, the fact that they actually built the bridge and it's not just CG, to me is kind of surreal. They serve as punctuation rather than propulsion. The focus is on discipline, honor, delusion, and the slow motion tragedy of two men consumed by their ideologies. It's a war epic shot like a moral fable, where the real battle happens in pride, self-mastery, and collapsing worldviews. So it's reflective in that there's long, deliberate psychological exchanges between Nicholson and Saito's confrontations on war and worldview and soldiering rather than violence. You have the escaped American who has to come back, lead the crack team back to destroy the bridge, and his self-preservation instinct that literally everybody else in this film seems to lack. It's very meditative on stuff like POW, monotony, unit structure, things like that. And the film is just, it asks a lot of questions about moral responsibility, self mastery, the line between professionalism and collaboration, and just when you become insane. So the bridge becomes a philosophical symbol, a monument to British professionalism, Japanese insecurity, and the madness of war. And I think, and I'm not sure if this was exactly the purpose, I think it does serve as kind of a microcosm and a summary of how the war in the Pacific went on the whole. I'd also like to say this kind of belongs into what I like to call the apolitical anti-war movie. That is, it's a movie that's anti-war in a general sense, but isn't really about the specific conflict it takes place during. Stuff like that, I would say, is things like Paths of Glory or Letters for Iwo Jima or something like Zulu, wherein it's about the horror of war, but it's not about the specifics of the conflict. I would also put all Quiet on the Western Front. I haven't seen the show, I've just read the book. So let's talk about a summary. So the setup is during World War II. This takes place in the Burmese theater. For those of you who aren't aware, so Japan basically had a strike south doctrine during World War II, where they attempted to invade pretty much all of Southeast Asia at once. So they occupied Indonesia, the Philippines, some of the Pacific Islands. They even occupied part of Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. They occupied Indochina and Malaysia and forced Thailand to become one of their vassals. And they made it as far as Burma, and we had this bizarre guerrilla war going on in Burma between the British and the Japanese. Which is really far away. And just something to keep in mind, most of Japan is not tropical. I think most of it, from my understanding, is kind of like a Mediterranean climate. Northern Japan's quite cold. I think southern Japan, Kyushu and Shikoku, are somewhat tropical, and Okinawa definitely is. But it's not like the climate's not like Burma. Like when the war started, a lot of people assumed that the Japanese were gonna do really well in jungles, but they came across all the same issues because it's not as if the climate they're from was any more jungle-like than what a lot of Europeans were used to. So we're having this fight in Burma. It's the literal end of the world, one of the least developed places on Earth, in jungles. Both sides can barely move because of all the dysentery and malaria and supply issues and mud. And it's just an overall utterly miserable experience in a backwater that no one cares about. So it's pretty much one of the worst places you could have been deployed during World War II. Anyways, so we have a bunch of British prisoners under Colonel Nicholson who are brought to a Japanese POW camp commanded by Colonel Saito. They're ordered to build a strategic railway bridge across, well, the River Kwai to help the Japanese extend their railway westward so they can better supply their troops on the front lines in Burma. I think this takes place in Thailand, though. So when they get there, there's 2 survivors left over from the previous batch of prisoners who the Japanese worked to death or killed. And they tell Colonel Nicholson, and try to kind of intimidate him and go, look, you have to go along with this. These people are crazy. If you don't do what they tell you to do, that they'll kill you. And it tries to get it all going. And Colonel Nicholson's like, no, I don't care. I'm British. I'm an officer and a gentleman. I'm going to stick by my guns. So the Japanese force the people to work on the bridge. And in part, they ask the officers to do manual labor. Now, within the Geneva Convention, you are allowed to use prisoners of war for labor within, obviously, humane constraints, you are not allowed to make officers do manual labor. I don't know if it's because it's seen as beneath them or whatever it is, but you're not allowed to do that. So Nicholson just goes, no, the officers aren't going to do that. It says right here in the Geneva Convention. He even takes out a copy of the Geneva Convention and shows it to Saito. And it begins this battle of wills between the two men that defines a lot of at least the first half of the movie. So the soldiers are sent off to try to build the bridge, and they more or less just manage to screw it up and sabotage it, and it barely makes any progress. And it's just a mess. It's a shit show. The bridge isn't advancing. Saito is trying to break Nicholson and do everything that he can to get the man to agree to his demand that the officers start doing manual labor, but more so than that, that they resolve their beef, because he's figured out pretty quick that the men aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing because of the beef that he's having with their commanding officer. And that's kind of one of the ongoing things in the movie is the British soldiers very much maintain their discipline. Like they salute officers, they march in formation, they sing military songs. Nicholson tries very hard to maintain discipline and keep them acting like soldiers. And part of why he kind of gets so wrapped up later on in the movie, I guess spoiler alert, in building the bridge, is he's very worried that if he doesn't keep discipline, if he doesn't keep his guys busy, they're going to get bored. And once they get bored, they're going to get into all kinds of trouble. Their discipline's going to start to fall apart. They're going to start getting into fights. They might start trying to escape, which normally would be an important thing, but not really in this case, because he feels that because they were ordered to surrender, that the British High Command's order is for him to stay in captivity and not try to escape. Also, they're in the middle of a jungle in the middle of nowhere, and escape is virtually impossible. But the relationship isn't entirely just cat and mouse. I don't know if you'd say it's cat versus cat or mouse versus mouse or something like that, because the Japanese aren't in like a really good situation either. Sure, they have guns and like rifles and machine guns and stuff, but they're outnumbered like 20, 30 to 1. There's way more British prisoners of war than there are Japanese, and most of them just have bolt-action rifles. If the British soldiers decided that they wanted to rise up, they could very easily kill the Japanese guards and take over the camp. Now, they aren't going to do that because they'd probably get stuck there and the Japanese would bomb the place or send a larger army. But Saito and the various Japanese are also kind of trapped there. And they know if they push too far that there's a real chance of some kind of riot. I mean, it's one thing if you're interning a bunch of civilians or criminals who naturally don't trust each other and steal from each other and victimize each other. But these are trained soldiers. This is a unit that was kept together. They have their officers there who they're used to listening to. They're used to working together. These men have had military training. They're not just random thugs off the street. They understand military tactics and close combat and stuff like that. These guys are also veterans. So you have 20 to 1 outnumbered by veterans who appear to maintain their discipline and professionalism, and that's a scary place to be. So anyway, so Saito tries to break Nicholson. They beat him. They starve him. They put him in the oven, which is a truly horrific punishment. Basically, they've built a small box out of aluminum or tin siding and just throw him in there and lock him in there. So we're in Burma in the jungle, and he's in an aluminum box. So you can only imagine he's basically just being roasted alive all day, every day. And he holds on, like he doesn't break. And this is kind of where we start to get into the interesting themes of the movie, wherein Saito kind of realizes something that you can't really do anything against a man who's not afraid of death. Nicholson's just like, no, I'm sticking to my guns. I'm a British officer. I will do my duty. You can kill me, you can torture me, you can try to burn me alive in an oven. It's not gonna work because I'm not afraid of death. And it's kind of funny because earlier in the movie, Saito basically is shitting on them for surrendering, and he's like, "You're dishonorable. You should have committed suicide. You're not soldiers. You're weaklings." And stuff like that. And he's faced with just the sheer force of will of Nicholson, and he just doesn't really know how to even deal with it. So he threatens Nicholson that, okay, I'm going to start killing your men and you'll be responsible. And Nicholson just has the very rare moral courage, rightly or wrongly, to say, okay, well, you can kill my men. It's not going to be my fault. You're the one who killed them. And I'm not going to give in because I know where giving in goes. And so Saito is just completely broken by this. Like, he has no idea what to even do at this point in time because the guy's not afraid of death and he's not afraid of his men being killed. So, what else do you really have? He tries to bribe them with like alcohol and food and stuff like that, and none of it works. And Saito is also under immense time pressure because if the bridge doesn't get built on time, he's going to have to commit suicide. And an interesting thing is Saito is actually afraid of death. He seems to be extremely afraid of death and shame and dishonor. And so he ultimately caves and he makes the compromise that, okay, the British officers will do administrative and supervisory roles, but they won't have to physically work, do manual labor. So the British take over, and Nicholson immediately just starts complaining. It's pretty funny because this regiment is from India, and they've had to build a lot of bridges themselves across India and across Burma. So they're very experienced, and they know how this whole thing works. So he's like, this is disgusting. These professional standards are terrible. There's no logistics. There's no work schedule. It's just the Japanese basically just shoved some tools in their hands and told them to build the bridge. And they immediately find out that the bridge is built on mud. So it's actually impossible to even build the bridge there because there's no bottom. So it's just going to keep sinking indefinitely. So he puts together this big plan, and there's a really funny scene where they have a conference that goes on for like 12 hours, where they go through like all their plans, like the quotas they've set up, the new engineering plans, how they want to move it, the materials they have, and all this other stuff. And Saito is just kind of sitting there and his like brain's exploding. And by the end of it, he's just completely zoned out, and he just keeps going, I've already given the order. I've already given the order. So Nicholson at this point has basically just mogged him and basically dominated him. So now he's in charge basically of the prison camp. And the thing is, I think this also points to the idea men have to have some kind of purpose and have to have some sort of schedule or discipline. And this is one of the reasons why people's mental and physical state often deteriorates so quickly when they're unemployed. If they don't have a purpose, they don't have something to get up in the morning to do, if they don't have something they're working towards, very quickly their discipline breaks down and they just start to be dysfunctional shadows of their former selves. So the men just start sleeping better, they start eating better, morale gets higher, they start behaving like soldiers again, but they've just been completely psychologically committed to build this like perfect engineering marvel bridge. And as they're building it, they're like, look, there's like ash trees in this forest. We can build a bridge that'll last 600 years. And the locals will know that our regiment built it, and they're like, yeah, we're going to build, this is going to be our legacy. And they wind up like making a plaque and putting the plaque up to celebrate the bridge being built. And they have a drag show. I don't know if it's progressive or offensive or both, to kind of celebrate it. And they're just really happy and proud about it. So on one level, Nicholson's kind of doing the right thing. His men are doing well psychologically. They're actively working. They're keeping engaged. Their brains are going. On the other hand, he is technically helping the enemy. He's helping the Japanese to build a bridge that will let them get supplies that they otherwise would not have been able to get across the river, because of their own incompetence. So while all this is happening, Shears, who's the American prisoner, had escaped, and he manages to get to a British medical hospital somewhere, I think probably in Rangoon, somewhere else in Burma. And there it's revealed that he pretended to be a commander. He's actually just a midshipman or some lower rank. And the British basically blackmail him into leading them back to the prison camp because they want to blow the bridge up. So the British commando team makes it back to the camp, and they set up explosives on the bridge, and they're waiting for the first train to go over it, so they can blow it up and destroy the train as well as the bridge in one go. So as this is happening, Nicholson is just walking up and down the bridge, and he's so hyped. He's like, "We're finally going to see the bridge go. We're going to see this train pass." And he notices like the wire, so he gestures to Colonel Saito. So they go and they follow the wire down to where the commandos are, prepared to blow the bridge up, and he just kind of loses it, and he starts waving his arms and yelling for the Japanese soldiers to come and stop them from destroying his bridge. And he gets into like a fight with the guy who's about to activate it, and that gets the other guy killed. And then the American guy goes over to try to blow it up, but he also gets shot. And then Nicholson's just staying there. He's like, "Oh wait, I've gone completely nuts." So with his kind of last breath, he also gets shot. He falls on the detonator and blows up the bridge as the train is going across it. And his kind of second in command, or the doctor or medical officer, just goes, "The madness, the madness." Which, once again, I find it hard to believe that is not inspired by Heart of Darkness with the horror, and that it was not also referenced in Apocalypse Now years later, when Francis Ford Coppola made it. So that was the end of it. The whole film is kind of a tragic comedy, but overall excellent. So let's talk about the themes. Now, we covered a bit of this. A lot of the film is the struggle between Nicholson versus Saito. As I said, it's interesting because Saito goes off, starts lecturing him about Bushido, talking about how the British are wusses, and they don't understand honor or commitment, and they're cowards. But Saito is ultimately the one who has the fear of death, who's afraid of failure, who's afraid of shame, and he's the one who caves in because he doesn't want to fail and have the shame of having to commit suicide. So in a sense, his just utter fearlessness in the face of death kind of embodies the principles of Bushido a lot better than Saito actually does. And Saito's a man who's just used to being able to use force and fear and stuff like that to get his way, and basically just kind of be a bully. But when he comes across someone who has the moral conviction to stand up to him, he just has absolutely no idea how to even deal with it. And I guess in a sense, this is like how the British saw themselves, in like the ideal, the orderly, the strict code of ethics, the concept of duty and honor, of placing that in the service to the British Empire above personal survival and the importance of self-sacrifice. And Nicholson kind of very much embodies this. And the Bushido is rhetorical only. And once again, this does in a lot of ways represent where Japan was by this point in time. We'll talk about more of it later. Also, there's just, we'll maybe talk about this a bit more in a minute, but it's just absurd. Like, why are the Japanese and British in this random place in the middle of nowhere in some jungle in Burma? It's not near where either of them are. I don't think there's really any natural resources. They're just basically fighting there over nothing because their governments for whatever reason, see this patch of jungle as being important for some reason. So it's an interesting kind of comparison, and like I said, by halfway through the movie, Saito just breaks down and actually starts crying in private, and he's just kind of completely subordinate to Nicholson going forward. And towards the end of his movie, he actually cuts off his top knot as kind of a sign of his ritual humiliation that Nicholson has just completely mocked him. So I think this largely summarizes Japan's war strategy, and how World War II actually went with regards to Japan's performance. So Japan entered it, and you can still see this theme very much in anime, particularly stuff like shonen. There is a belief in Japan that willpower can overcome everything. That if your character's strong enough, that if your desire's strong enough, if you struggle hard enough, it can overcome any kind of deficiencies in material reality. If you notice in like shonen, generally speaking, the more determined someone is, the stronger they are, even if it otherwise just doesn't really make sense. And this was largely the attitude they entered World War II with. They felt that, okay, if they could just mobilize the country spiritually, if they could get it committed enough to the cause, that somehow this would overcome everything else. So I like to describe Japan's strategy in World War II as being LARP. For those of you who aren't aware, LARP stands for live action role playing, and it's used to refer to like impractical but overly dramatic symbolic gestures that operate on like video game or movie logic, but are thought to work in the real world. And Japan, if you look at like their war strategy, they just attacked everywhere. Like they're in Burma for some reason. They attacked Indonesia. They occupied the Aleutian Islands. There was a plan to invade Australia at one point. And just none of these are feasibly possible. Because just the logistics, the amount of resources that they would need in terms of oil. Like imagine the logistics of having to supply a fleet to like sail down to southern Australia and then occupy it, and just how long the supply lines would be. Like it's not really possible. And the Americans had a large submarine fleet. So whenever they were trying to supply these isolated garrisons that they refused to withdraw from, they would just get sunk constantly. But it was viewed as like dishonor, and if the troops just believed hard enough that they could hold these impossible positions. So in a lot of things, engineering, transportation, supply, logistics, these things were considered secondary, or from a lack of fighting spirit. And so they thought that they could basically fight a modern industrial war with medieval assumptions about willpower. Maybe I'm playing it up a bit too much, but this just seems to me, from everything I've studied about it, how this whole thing went. And the Japanese, much like Saito, would often double down or triple down on obviously bad ideas, because saving face is so important, because they have a shame-based culture. The thing is, though, on an individual level, don't get me wrong, the Japanese soldiers fought with terrifying effectiveness, especially in China. Like, towards even the end of the war, they were just blowing through nationalist divisions as if they weren't even there. I mean, the Americans did beat them, but they gave a very hard fight, and you hear about, like, Guadalcanal and Okinawa and all the cases where they were fighting the Japanese. And they were widely regarded as being individually brave and skilled in their own respect. But like Saito, he has discipline, he has men, they're committed, but there's no workable strategy. They don't even know how to like build the bridge. The Japanese ideology glorified death, but ironically, they were paralyzed by the fear of disgrace or recrimination, and that often would prevent them from acting. And it would also make them do like just suicidal actions, like the death before dishonor, where even if they were a competent soldier, they would just charge in to get themselves killed so they wouldn't have to face the shame of surviving. To me, probably the ultimate example of this is Operation Ishigo. So, Operation Ishigo took place towards the end of World War II. Basically, the Japanese colonial empire was collapsing. So, their 40 chess plan is okay, so we can't ship materials from Indonesia anymore. So, we're going to do an overland clearing operation and we're just going to surge forward and cut out a line of territory from Manchuria down to southern China and just just occupy the railway, and then we'll be able to ship stuff overland. They also wanted to try to knock China out of the war and destroy the American bomber bases there. So, I mean, they killed an immense number of Chinese soldiers. They completely wrecked what was left of the Nationalist Army and burned large portions of the country. But, like, it was just LARP. It was just, we're going to do this grand cinematic offensive, and it just didn't go anywhere. So, I think this movie kind of embodies a lot of that. Once again, why are they even in Burma? That's just yet another question. To me, it's always surreal whenever I watch something made in Britain, like before the 1970s or 80s, because it feels like I'm another planet. Like, of all the countries in the world, there's no country that I think embodies just the effeminate, self-hating, smug, pathetic weakness that has infected the West than Britain. To use a crass term, I think it's the most paused country probably in the world. I mean, you have a country in which knife ownership is banned. Where they've restricted knives. You can't carry a screwdriver around in your car in a toolbox. They ID you if you try to buy a broom handle. They give people harsher sentences for Facebook posts than rape or murder. Like, it is a dystopian hellhole. And seeing, like, guys like Nicholson, just talk like actual males. And they have the upper class accent, but it's not like cringy received pronunciation that sounds like some Redditor tried to adopt it because they like Doctor Who. But them talking about duty, them fighting, them talking about the Empire, them having civilizational and national confidence, talking about Christianity. It's all just really weird to me, given just how far, like, the UK has fallen. Like, you can see that with American stuff. America's definitely declined as a country a lot, but you still have a lot of people who have the rah America, fuck yeah attitude. You still have a lot of the people who are very much in that time frame, a lot of conservatives and populists and people from the South who you could see them in these movies. You could see them being one of the characters in these movies. I can't really think of anyone in modern Britain who would be in a film like this today. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think a good kind of metaphor for this is the use of Technicolor. So Technicolor is a way of adding color to film that produces extremely saturated, bright, high contrast colors that don't actually exist in real world. And it's how they used to do things back during the 30s, I think, to the 60s or 70s. The best example of this is Wizard of Oz. And you just get this very, I think, painterly, beautiful color palette. And this movie makes good use of it. And the fact that it's in the jungle, and it really just makes all the colors pop. Something I really hate about a lot of modern just movie and game design is everything is just gray. And in real world, there's lots of color all over the place, but that's just kind of taken down. So it's kind of nice to see it like bright and standing out. The only thing that's kind of funny about this time period is how night is them shooting during the day with a filter over it. Because I don't think they had night vision invented yet, but it's funny. It has a certain charm to it. So just as films don't look like this anymore, Britain doesn't look like this anymore. And I just think it's kind of a reference or kind of a metaphor to that time period. So, let's take a look at how I would grade the film now that we've gone through it. So I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. I don't know if that's too high or too low. I do agree this is one of the best movies of all time. There's some movies I like more than it, but it is solid. On my scale, 9 is a great, or sorry, excellent. A 9 is an excellent. I like Apocalypse Now a bit more than this. Maybe that's like a pleb tier opinion or something. This is really good though. So the things that I personally enjoyed, the Nicholson versus Saito, the deep existential ideological struggle, I thought was really interesting. Just the thematic depth that dealt with a lot of issues. I liked that there was a lot of ambiguity to it. The film doesn't clearly present Nicholson as being entirely in the right. It kind of portrays him as going kind of crazy. So there's that. There's a lot of kind of absurdism and surrealism, and it inadvertently, I think, really does kind of symbolize Japan's entire war effort. Another thing I just find funny is, once again, as with Zulu, it's just this irrelevant stuff that people are taking really seriously. Like it's Burma, it's the edge of the world, it's this fight that's not going to go anywhere. There's no way Japan's going to actually invade it. It's going to be able to invade India. It's just kind of a dick waving contest, and it just the absurdity of that is much like in Zulu, where like in this random place in South Africa. So my minor criticisms, the Shears American subplot is not that compelling. It felt like they just needed it to happen because they needed some way for the bridge to be destroyed. So not a bad subplot, not that I'm really complaining, but it's one of the weaker aspects. I didn't find the pacing that bad, but I'm sure that it would drag for a lot of people. And if people find this movie a bit slow, I think that is a fair criticism. It didn't really bother me watching the full movie, because I've seen parts of this movie, but I hadn't really sat down and watched all of it. And I guess last, like Nicholson's delusion and him going insane is hinted at. The end of the film feels very rushed. Like the final showdown, the bridge getting destroyed. Maybe that was kind of the point, to kind of have like an anticlimax, but I don't know. It just seemed kind of weird to me. I'm not really sure how to describe it. It just, the end seemed very rushed. So just going off of what people have said historically, Alec Guinness and Sessue Hayakawa, who played Saito, were both lauded for great performances and moral ambiguity. Excellent cinematography. Like I said, I really enjoyed the Technicolor. Jungle into a mythic environment. They've said this is kind of the turning point in Lean's career before he went on to do Lawrence of Arabia. They liked that the film was complicated. That it's not just heroic and it's not just good versus evil. There's a lot more kind of going on there. That the film covered a portion of the war that was pretty much completely forgotten, the whole Burmese campaign. So the complaints that people had, not very many, but it's not historically accurate. The POW experience was worse, much worse than was portrayed in the film. Although early on they say that the entire last crop of prisoners died, but they don't really show that. That the movie is too ambiguous. And some other people just say that it's kind of a bit slow. That 2.5 hours is too long. I think that is a fair criticism. I didn't really find it an issue. I didn't really find myself getting bored at any point during the movie. But that, I think, if someone was to say it's too long and could probably be cut down a bit, I think that's fair. So, on the whole, Bridge on the River Kwai, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Excellent movie, definitely one of the greats. If you're interested in war movies or like Alec Guinness or the kind of the themes that we've discussed, I definitely check it out. So that is the review of Bridge on the River Kwai. More exciting videos to come, everybody. God bless and have a nice day.